Ladies and gentlemen, this is your final boarding call for the good ship SS Tomorrow.
Today on The Friendly Futurist, the hybrid workforce. Are they cyber safe working from home? Welcome back, and we've got a very special report because for the last 19 months, you might have heard this term, the hybrid workforce. And let's be honest, it's an obsession of mine. This is how we are, what I call the great pivot here on The Friendly Futurist. Are we cyber safe? That is the question. Did you know in Australia, 73% of cyber attacks recorded this year have been targeting remote workers? And from that, 9 out of 10 remote workers have connected more than 6 devices on their company network whilst working at home. Worryingly, 43% of remote workers are using it to access confidential financial records, and 52% are using it to share consumer data. Data that you really shouldn't be using anything less than on a secure connection, because this is highly sensitive work that could spread. What can businesses do to help mitigate these risks? I've invited back some old friends of ours of the show, Tenable. This time we've got Nathan Wensler, the Chief Security Strategist from Tenable, on the line to discuss his latest blog report on this trend. Today we've got Nathan from Tenable, and we're going to have a catch-up because you might remember our series, our special reports on the state of cybersecurity. And Nathan this time is kind enough to join us. And Nathan, thank you very much for coming onto the show.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Now, of course, we're talking about today's Tenable's new latest blog report about the state of remote working, particularly here in Australia, when I think it's up to 73% are at risk or have faced some sort of attacks. And for those who are still working at home, I know a lot of the east coast of Australia are at the moment, why are remote workers the most at risk from cyber attacks?
Yeah, it's a trend we've been seeing happening for quite a long time, quite frankly, and the pandemic situation really just exacerbated it. When you've had a situation in the past where a lot of organizations and companies relied on their corporate security controls, that very sort of data center, office building centric kind of mindset, suddenly when you're faced with having a remote workforce and everybody's at home, everybody's distributed, those controls start to break down a little bit. And criminal actors know this. Right? So we see a big shift in where the risk posture happens. To your point, we've seen about 3/4 of the recent cyber attacks all targeting remote workers in Australia.
Yeah.
That's not coincidence. They realize that those protections that a lot of organizations have put into place are weaker or may not even exist in the remote setup because we're talking about people's home networks.
Yeah. And what specific types of cyber attacks are being directed at remote workers?
Well, as you might imagine, it's sort of all the same kind of tried and true things that work. I think we need to note here that most of these attackers are businesses, essentially. They're out for financial gain in one way, shape, or form, and they know the things that work, right? Phishing emails, ransomware, exploitation of well-known vulnerabilities. You gain access to everybody's system or potentially corporate data. It's the same kind of attacks we've seen. They just now have, and if you think about it from the hacker's perspective, they've got better targets to go after, right? They have targets they know will be more susceptible to these attacks. And that's why they're leveraging kind of the same things, just right at the remote workers where it's easiest to compromise.
And who are necessary behind these cyber attacks? Is it criminals? Is it some nefarious arm of a foreign government? Who is the black hats here?
Well, from a remote worker perspective, right? If you're someone who works for a company, chances are very, very low you're going to be seeing a nation state actor coming after you. I think that there's a lot of that in the media. We all think that there's the big, scary political cyber warfare landscape happening. And it is, but that's not targeting folks like you and I.
Yeah.
Right? That's just not the goal. So the kind of folks we're talking about, yeah, they're digital criminals. They're very commonly even organized groups. They behave in some ways like businesses. In fact, there's a whole bunch of reports out there you can find over the last several years where we've seen groups in former Soviet Republic states and some of the Eastern European countries that are based there that have office space and cubicles, and they provide their hackers with healthcare benefits and salaries. Like, it's very much a corporate enterprise. But financial gain is the motivation, just like any other business. They just happen to do it through some very illegal activities. So I think it's an important piece to consider, though, if you're trying to protect yourself, you're trying to protect your organization, either way, the motivation here is financial.
Yeah.
So your financial records, your bank accounts, your identities, like, these are all things that are very valuable. And that's the kind of folks that we're dealing with in these things.
And on this subject, and as we're moving towards more of a hybrid workforce, should bosses, Australian bosses in particular, provide a duty of care through subsidising cybersecurity for remote workers?
Absolutely. I've been working in the information security field for about almost 25 years now.
Wow.
And this has been a long-standing issue with a lot of organizations. It's not a new thing. Where do we need to sort of draw lines about how much we protect our workers? How much do we protect the assets that they have? And as we've gone to a remote workforce primarily, and we're going to continue. I mean, if you look at, I think the Australian audience from our survey, it's about 60% of organizations that they are going to continue this remote workforce strategy perpetually. So when you're now considering that your environment's changed, the way your staff is interacting with your business, your customers, your constituents has changed, we've had to face facts about where the responsibility lies to protect our data and our really critical assets. So I think there's no question in my mind that organizations do have that responsibility to protect and secure the data and systems that are being used. And the key part of that is understanding what you have.
Yeah.
I think the one piece that everyone's kind of struggling with is that visibility thing. I hate to say it as a buzzword, but it's the truth. Even when we had nice contained office buildings, it was hard to understand where were all our assets, where is all our data, what's really critical to us as a business. Now, we're trying to get that same kind of visibility to remote workers.
Yeah.
Where are our assets now? Are they home? Are they in a coffee shop? Where what's going on? So you've got to embrace that responsibility, but the key problem to get there is that visibility piece, because without that, it's nearly impossible for an organization to be able to step up and say, okay, we understand the scope of what we're responsible for, and we can put in good controls to protect it. But if I don't understand the scope of what I'm dealing with, it's really, really hard to do that.
Further on that subject, do you think there should be a greater awareness, better education for particularly those workers now finding themselves working at home and maybe not necessarily aware of cybersecurity or threats and the risks?
That's a really good point. And I maybe I should apologize a little bit. I don't want to make it sound like it's a purely technical kind of solution. Education is critical.
Yeah.
It is absolutely critical as part of this effort. If you're not doing something to educate your remote workers about why these things are important, that these risks are real, and to help them make it kind of front of mind, you're really doing everybody a disservice. And it's especially important now when you've got situations where the workers are home. Most of them have personal devices on those same networks. Now you've got corporate devices and your own personal phone, your kids' Xbox or PlayStation's probably on there. You've got, iPads, everything's on your network. The more we can help the workers understand the importance of protecting their information and our corporate information, the more they'll carry that mindset to their family, to their own personal devices, to their own personal information. It's a smart business strategy to have that education for corporate data, but it's, quite frankly, it's a good citizenry to do it for your folks to make sure they're protecting themselves.
Yeah. And what are your top 3 tips for the remote workers to help them be better protected against cyber threats?
Yeah, I mean, especially in this day and age, again, if you're a remote worker and your whole kind of mode of doing work has changed, a lot of the tips you've heard in the past are still true, maybe especially true now because of how remote workers are being targeted. First and foremost, phishing is the big one, right? So don't click on links, don't open attachments from unknown emails. If you're not sure about something, ask somebody, ask your IT department, do a little research online to see if the email's coming from a valid domain or valid company. Avoid clicking on those kinds of things, because that's a good way to compromise your system. Credentials. I think the other thing that a lot of folks don't remember to do is make sure you're using good, strong passwords, use two-factor authentication. Almost every major service you have today, Google, Amazon, any of your online shopping companies, they all offer some kind of two-factor authentication, a method of kind of securing all of your accounts. Use it. I realize for a lot of folks it can be kind of inconvenient, but it is a critical security control. And if you're talking about your bank accounts, your credit cards, somebody racking up a very large bill on your Amazon account or wherever you shop, that's a really big one. So make sure that you're taking care of your passwords, keeping them secure, don't share them with anyone. And then I would say whatever possible, especially if you're going to do remote work, try to leverage your company's VPN. Encrypt and protect the tunnel the way you connect.
Yes.
It can help mitigate some of the more obvious attacks. And certainly if you're home, a VPN will allow a little bit of separation from how your system's connecting outbound as opposed to everything else on your network. So it's a good practice to always try to do that too.
Very good points there, Nathan. And finally, where else can we find you, and where else can we find more information about this latest attack?
I'm online in a lot of places. You can find me on LinkedIn pretty easily. I also have a small presence on Twitter at Fedora_Nate, because I often will be found wearing hats. Don't ask. But also, if you're interested in more information about this particular report and some of the recommendations we put aside for businesses as well, especially because there's kind of a different challenge when you're on the other side of the remote worker piece. Tenable.com. We've got the full reports available there. You can check out what the respondents have surveyed in this case. And I think it's a really good view for everybody involved in this change of our work, because the survey, as we built it, we didn't just ask security people. We equally surveyed remote workers, security practitioners and leaders, and business leaders. So we got a really good insight from all of the different parties involved, including the people who are struggling with this stuff day to day. I think it's a really good piece of insight for any of these organizations that are struggling right now to kind of see how their workers are feeling about all of this. So check it out there.
No worries. Nathan, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you again, and keep up the good work.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me too.
You're welcome. Thanks, Nathan. That's some very valuable insights. We're not just talking about here and now. On this podcast is about the future, and what's dawning on us is Web 3.0, an internet landscape that's built up more securely through blockchain. And you know this is a de facto blockchain podcast because this is an obsession of mine, because I think it really would revolutionize the world. So building up on what Nathan said, we asked the question, why conventional blockchain tech is not enough to solve the world's privacy woes. And our second guest today comes all the way from Denmark. It's Peter Franson. He's the Chief Technology Officer from Patricia Blockchain, and he's doing some really amazing projects out there at the moment, including better internet search, which will replace Google once blockchain becomes the norm. And what Peter has done is not just have blockchain. It has combined blockchain with what is known as MPC, or multi-party computations. This creates a more secure blockchain, and also, as we all know, the blockchain is better privacy and better security, as well as transparency. It ticks 3 boxes. It's kind of a paradox in a way, but it's really, really amazing stuff. And Peter is joining us on the line right now. We've got Peter Franson. He's from Copenhagen and he's with Patricia Blockchain. I hope is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, we'll do it like that, yeah.
And we're going to have a really heartfelt chat today about why blockchain will not necessarily solve all the world's privacy woes, but at the same time it will cure quite a lot of data leaks and having been sold as sort of like cattle by the big tech giants and everything like that. And I think there's a dawning of an exciting new internet age. And Peter, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. And first and foremost, can you just tell my listeners about your work and your expertise?
Well, my background is software development. I was a computer scientist 20 years ago, and I worked as a professional software developer, both as a project manager and a developer, but also managing teams. And have for the last 5 years working in Patricia. We're setting up this team where we are building a new blockchain that's going to Well, I wouldn't necessarily agree with you saying not solve all the problems in the world. We are going to attack most of the problems in the world. Maybe not necessarily clean water, but the rest is actually up for grabs. So in terms of what I'm doing is that I'm managing the software development teams and setting up the architecture for it and setting up the procedures for these things and trying to onboard new partners and working together with different partners, setting up their software environments.
And bring forward to the question,
So what we're doing is actually revolutionizing the blockchain world. It's hard to give a short answer to it, so let me just dive directly into it.
Please go ahead.
Our platform is orthogonal to what you can see in the blockchain world. The blockchain, as I envision it, is basically what is going to be one of the core fundamental technologies that's going to be part of the future infrastructure of all computing in the future. So in the 1970s, we had databases, and this databases was a novel idea. There was a lot of discussion about why we were using databases. There was also a lot of discussion about how databases were supposed to be structured. Nowadays, we all see them as relational databases, and you can compute on it. But in the 70s, this was not a clear thing. Similar thing we have now with blockchain is that the next version of storing information and working with data is going to be blockchains. So the next version is not going to be a centralized authority, it's going to be a decentralized authority where we have the data split across different sections of the world, and the transaction processing can happen on different parts of the world. All of these in the current public deployments of blockchains are all public. So every transaction, every movement of value, every smart contract execution is publicly available for everyone to expect and for everyone to analysis. So there's a giant company called Chainalysis that most people would have heard of at this point. They are working on sifting through all of these immense data sets and figuring out who's actually transferring to who. And from these data sets, a lot of information is actually leaked.
Wow.
A lot of information. So if you may think that you have a private key and that private key is private and your public key is unidentifiable. But I bet you, if you are using the same wallet address, shopping coffee from your local neighborhood, shopping subway tickets, shopping and buying electricity bills and all of that, all of these data points linked together. And then let's say you do a vacation in November in Florida. Well, there's only one wallet that has your local residences and went to Florida. So now you've been identified. You haven't actually sent any personal information to the wallet. You haven't done anything personal. However, your spending habits will actually have leaked that information. So this public, very core identity of the blockchain world and the public blockchain deployments is intrinsic, and it's inherent in the underlying infrastructure. And it's good. It is very good that we have a transparent financial system. It's good that we have a transparent way of organizing computational power. People have been using previously has been something like Amazon, Google Cloud. It's been Tencent have their own thing. So you have different places of running your software. However, these are proprietary, unpublic, but they can be snooped upon by, very interested parties.
Yes.
It's not like any intelligence agency, but any intelligence agency with respect for themselves would have been snooping into these data. So we are talking about a lot of these very central data centers that are being looked into by intelligence agencies. So it creates a proprietary transparency for the wrong people. The public deployment of blockchain is actually a good thing. We are getting a complete transparency. However, we need privacy.
Yes.
That's what we're giving to the blockchain world. We are providing privacy. We are providing confidential computations. So the confidentiality of your data and the confidentiality of the computations is actually what's on our platform. This is what we're doing. So we accidentally, once we started building up our platform, we started out building MPC, which is basically doing a more advanced version of zero-knowledge proofs. So we're doing zero-knowledge computation. We can do any sort of computation using MPC. You could also use homomorphic encryption and other techniques, but this is the primary technique that we're working on at this point. We needed to all coordinate this work, and then we had to build something that could coordinate work across a distributed set of networks. That coordination was very easy to implement using a blockchain. So we built a blockchain to support our privacy layer, the privacy layer that we are providing. And this blockchain now is being interlinked with other blockchains, making it a second privacy layer for other blockchains, but also it's going to be a blockchain in its own right, and it's going to run all sorts of different computations that we're going to run on it.
Fascinating stuff there, Peter. And can you talk us through some of the projects Patricia has got in the bag, or something quite exciting? I mean, we're seeing like alternatives to social media or for Google in your portfolio, and I'm really quite excited hearing more about them.
We originally started looking into the blockchain world when we worked with Instar Networks, which is a privacy survey system, so that they can give data in a private setting where they don't have to reveal the data in order to be eligible to getting a reward for getting these data. That's what our first, how to put it, entry into working with blockchain. And so basically, especially in the US, you would have a lot of people that are unconsciously or maybe reluctantly, but their data is being sold across different media. In Europe, we have this Cambridge Analytica scandal. We have all of these things. We have a much more higher level of awareness of protecting your private data, and you have actually protection of people and persons about their private data, so they can't just really being used as they are being in the US. So this was our sort of first entry to it. So we built a privacy layer for their blockchain-based solution, and then from that we extrapolated some of the tools that we built into it. We are also working in Denmark with some of the core Danish national agencies that are running. We want to run confidential computations on the data that they have in hold. They are not allowed to allow computations on these data freely, but what we are providing is we are actually providing a technology that can enable these data to be computed upon without revealing the data. And that's the core, that we can provide the confidential computations on these data without revealing the original data. And this is where we are sort of moving the barrier for what people can expect that your data is going to be used for. The processing on your data can now be restricted to, so previously you would have to give out your data.
Yes.
But now the processing can be restricted to the results of the computations. So you as a person, as a data holder, you have spending habits. So you probably buy your coffee in the same place. You probably use the same subway station. You probably are going to the same places every time you are doing stuff. These spending habits can be used in computations where people can get preferential treatments or they can get discounts without revealing who you are, without revealing the actual data, but just getting a flag. So you can get a red flag saying that this person is actually eligible for a discount. You can do these computations without revealing the raw data. We've done that with Insights Network. We're trying to do this with the Danish national agencies. We have a platform called Data for Good that we're working with, where they're trying to set free the personal data that are being stored in GDPR terms. So you would have a lot of data, say for Google, you would have Fitbit data, you would have, in Denmark we have really, really good data infrastructure, so we have a lot of data in Denmark. And these data we are very trustworthy about. It's complicated to really put it into work. Would you allow your insurance company to see your spending habits?
No.
No, not really, because maybe that's sort of over the line, but maybe you would like to get a discount if you revealed the content of your spending habits into a computation that gave you a discount, yes or no.
Yes.
That you would allow. So this is some of the things that the Data for Good platform actually can do, that the Data for Good platform can take these external data, do a computation that you yourself as a person can inspect. So you can actually see the computation yourself, and you can see that the result is actually a given output. And then the Data for Good are organizing different computational providers that are being the decentralized network in their case. And this now makes it a much different trust case. You don't have to trust a third-party consultancy company that you have to give your data to. Even in Denmark, we have a lot of leaks. We have a lot of issues where people are not protecting the personal data. This is the next level. This is a revolutionizing next step of the future, is that we are going to provide an infrastructure that's going to protect your data at a much higher level and at a much higher standard. So in the future, it wouldn't be possible to accidentally leak your social security number or your private identification, your email. It wouldn't be leaked, but because it wouldn't be there. It wouldn't be a thing.
Yeah, well, I'm in Australia. We're like the cyber hacking capital of the world at the moment. That's really, really fascinating stuff. I think I really love that concept of taking back control. And
yes, that's it. That's the core value proposition that we are giving. Is we're giving people the chance to take back control. So this is sort of a idealistic way of approaching the world, and it is, in essence, what we're doing, which is awe-inspiring.
Yeah.
Every day I go to work, I am like, I'm just not doing work, I'm actually trying to be part of a better world.
Yes.
Trying to participate in building a world where we actually don't necessarily have to be data subjects, each individual. We have to participate in the world and together with the company. Another point is actually, and this is not something that we've touched upon. So this is sort of the personal part of it. The other part is that companies now can get access to data that they previously could not get access to. So you would have legislation against monopoly. You can't have all the hotels in Copenhagen. They can't discuss when there's going to be a lot of bookings, when there's a large conference, because that would mean that they would be utilizing the monopoly.
Yeah.
So there's legislation against that. But now we can actually provide the computation that can give cheaper hotel rooms on average, because these hotels are now being able to coordinate through a decentralized network where the computation is only giving the result whether or not there's a large demand or there's a low demand. So these are things where we can actually also move the business world. So one of the biggest problems, one could argue that you could call it, is that the big tech in the world today is being controlled by a very few players.
Yeah.
We all know them. And this is actually becoming a problem in the world, because this centralization is leading to less and less competition and less poorer and poorer, how do you put it? The number of service offerings are being homogeneous, and they're becoming poorer and poorer. I'm old enough to actually remember the time where we only had Internet Explorer 6.
Yes.
And we had that for 6 years, I think, or something. It was a really long time we had a really bad Internet Explorer, which was the term then. You had an Internet Explorer. Nowadays we have Chrome, we have Firefox, we're getting new browsers, we're getting Brave, we're getting a whole variety of different browsers, and the level of innovation in the field has increased manifold. And then Chrome overtook after Internet Explorer, and the innovation it flatlined.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was little innovation. Now we are seeing a lot more innovation. And the point is, if you have a very few number of actors in a market, then you would see very low innovation. And the disruption is hard to get. But what we are providing is that we are providing a way where smaller companies can get access to some of the data that the big companies are claiming currently for themselves and solely for themselves. These data are now we can set them to work. These data can now be part of a computation where smaller companies can participate and get access to the data and become wiser based on these data without revealing the data.
Yeah.
So we are giving back control not only to people, but to the market. So we are releasing control of data into a much more broader aspect.
Yeah.
And that is the vision.
Yeah.
So this has to be written in code. We have to write it statement for statement. So the vision is there. It's just that it's hard work.
Yes, absolutely.
Getting there.
And kudos to you to break up the oligopoly. The oligarchs are the ones that really control them, particularly the ones in Silicon Valley, ones that are playing with rocket ships at the moment.
Those guys, exactly.
Looking forward, Peter, have we yet realised the full potential of Web 3.0?
We are only scratching the surface. Yeah. The place where data is not centrally, but where we're talking services to service, they're working across different infrastructure, different platforms. We are only scratching the surface of that. So I think we are going to see a number of central actors and a number of central platforms that are going to be crucial in the world. We are going to see central bases in the future. I am old-fashioned. I do realize that I'm not as, hyperbole when it comes to the future. I like the fact that when I go down to the bank and show my passport, they are giving me my money. Yeah. There's someone who's holding the keys for my money. And I can just argue, looking right, with my passport in hand, that they will give me my money because I accidentally lose stuff. Keys to cryptocurrencies. I have lost money by losing password. That's a thing. I am old-fashioned. I lose stuff. I realize that I lose stuff. I don't want to bear the entire risk of smaller money doesn't matter. If I drop $1 on the street, I can live with the loss of that. I don't really want to live with the loss of my house.
That's right.
So there's sort of a discrepancy in that. So I think we're going to see central authorities that's going to deliver some of the services that are going to be like old people like me that want the custodial service of your house and your property and whatever shares you have. You would want to have those. So those are going to be there. But the economy, the way that say airline bookings, all of these things, those are going to be much, much, much more decentralized and much more, marketplace, suffering the verdict of marketplace. Because what the big players are doing, the oligopoly that we are talking about, they are centralizing the market. So there are very little markets where you can actually access stuff. It could be Google search, it could be friend search, it could be stuff search. I'm talking about, in this case, Google, Facebook and Amazon. Those are the three places you would find those things. I don't have a Facebook account, and it's actually a problem. It's a huge problem for me, because whenever I go to the cinema, whenever I'm talking to my old classmates, I can't find them anywhere, so I'm doing without. So that's sort of like going back to pen and paper, which is really annoying. These services, I envision, will at some point be much more prone to decentralization and to a more flatter economy where you don't see these central authorities that are doing stuff for us.
And as this podcast is about the future, what else is on the horizons that's really driving your curiosity right now?
Well, to be honest, so we have a fairly big deadline in a few months. So to the employees in the company, I'm talking about something called event horizons. There are things, and this has started once I entered the blockchain space. There are things that I cannot see beyond.
Yeah.
And I've experienced it a couple of times, 3 times, I think, so far. And the next big event horizon for me is this. We're doing a mainnet launch in end of this year. And that is going to be, for me, it is an event horizon. I can't see beyond it. I don't know really what's going to come. I know where we are at this point. But so my curiosity is to better the world. My intention is to try to figure out, and I am being placed in several situations where I am capable of changing some things to the better, and not smaller things. So this Data for Good platform is one of these things where we can actually be part of changing the culture about data in Denmark and hopefully in Europe as well. Yeah. And one of the things that people try, especially, I don't know how it is in Australia actually, but in Europe, a lot the privacy concerns are big. In the US, they are not. But there are concerns about the concerns. Yeah. So they are considering whether or not it's a good thing. In Asia, you would actually find a number of countries that are implementing legislation that are quite similar to what we in Europe call GDPR, the data protection regulation of your personal data. And this is also happening in Asia, and I think it's most likely also going to happen in Australia. I would expect that it has happened in New Zealand. There's a transformation of the world that we are looking into, where we are at the brink of a new world.
Yes.
So if you're saying, what am I expecting? That would be missing the point. Because if I try to expect things, I'm looking beyond something. I'm looking into a black hole. Once I've crossed the event horizon, once I'm beyond that, once next year, this time, we will be talking about maybe the same things. But we really can't figure out the human expectation is, how do you put it? It is iterative, it is additive. We are taking the world that we see today and then we are adding stuff. But that's why Nokia got killed.
Yes.
That's why the Nokia phone disappeared. It's because the iPhone was not additive. It changed the fabric of the way that we are communicating with each other. I had a Palm Pilot in the old days. Where you had a mark and then you wrote messages and then you synced it when you put it into the dock. The iPhone changed that. Basically, we have emails in toilets.
Yes.
That was unheard of 20 years ago.
Absolutely.
So we are looking into something. I think we are looking into a number of places where the world, the fabric of the way that the internet works and the way that the world works would change. But we're looking into as a wholly new scenarios for working with data, for working with persons, and for working with people. I think what we're going to see is a number of different innovative services where smaller insurance companies actually can get access to a huge client base just by accessing the personal data of these people without actually revealing the content of these personal data. But they can give much more, tailored offerings for these people. So someone like me, they would see, well, you need this type of offering based on my profile. But they wouldn't get access to my profile. They wouldn't get access to my spending habits. They wouldn't get access to my bank account. They wouldn't get access to my credit. They wouldn't get access to my tax returns. But this is what insurance companies would really, really like to get hold of, because it would make it much easier for them to target people with much more specified offerings, service offerings.
Yeah, absolutely. And Peter, making the world a better place through technology, you're on the right podcast here. And it's been an absolute pleasure having you on this afternoon. Before I let you go, and we'll check up in another year's time and see how everything's progressing, because I think this is just the start of something really, really mad and rad that we're going to... So where else can we find you?
Well, we do have a homepage, and I'm on that homepage. As I said, I'm not on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn. So if you want to look me up, you can definitely look me up there, and I'll be happy to respond to you guys. I prefer not to be asked if I want to buy software developers, but I'd be happy to talk about these kind of challenges and working with data and doing projects, doing proof of concept where we are trying to establish connections with other parties that are trying to work differently with data, getting access to data that's not there, and trying to build a better data economy. That's what we are trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve a new data economy where data is being put to work confidentially.
Yeah.
So if you want to catch me there, I'm there. You can find me on my homepage. I also have both our CEO and myself are participating in a number of partnership meetings and stuff like that. So if you want to hear more of that, then you can also follow me on LinkedIn. I'm trying to post interesting stuff. Some of it is actually in Danish, but also a lot of it is in English. So you can follow me there as well.
Peter, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you very much for Nathan and Peter for their inputs. And also a big shout out and a thank you to the PR people that put us in touch with it. So we got Sophia from Sling & Stone. Sling & Stone is one of my favourite PR agencies in the world because they put me in touch with some amazing guests, including Nathan, and also Izzy from Waxman, who put me in touch with Peter. And Waxman is also coming on board right now, and they are going to put me in touch with some amazing NFT/metaverse people. Speaking of which, coming up on the next episode, unless you were hiding underneath the rock in the last week of October, you may have noticed that Facebook, the parent company, has changed its name from Facebook to Meta. Why? Because Mark Zuckerberg has dropped a very big Easter egg in his press statement that he is investing in the metaverse. Now, I've chatted about Web 3.0 on this podcast, but with the metaverse, we're going into Web 4.0. But what exactly is it? So on the next 2 episodes coming up, we're going down that rabbit hole. We're following Alice down that really scary cyber rabbit hole that is the metaverse, which will be very exciting stuff. We've got some amazing guests that we have spoken to over the last few months, and this will really open your eyes on what is coming up literally around the corner. So have a listen to that on The Friendly Futurist. Now, before we go, a little more housekeeping. As you well know, I'm into blockchain, and one particular area of blockchain is NFTs. Now, I'm going to release a weekly headline reading podcast called the NFT Art Explosion. Details in the show notes, and I will put out a trailer in this feed very shortly. And I hope you guys can join me on that podcast every week as we explore the latest in the world of NFTs, which has gone from an oddity into something really amazing. It's going to fuel a cultural revolution. Now, The Friendly Futurist is a podcast West production. It's been produced and edited by me, Dave Monk, further editing by Alvin Lacerna. If you love this show, the best thing to do is download the Acast app, follow us, leave us a review. That way we can help grow this community in the Acast ecosystem, the biggest podcast ecosystem in the world, mind you. And if you really love the show, please leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast platform. Leave us a tip or a donation via Buy Me a Coffee. Details in the show notes. Until next time, friends, remember to stay curious, and the future is user-friendly.